There we go. Go for it, Phil.
Do you want to put the title chart on?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Recession Rebellion, the end of week 4. This is the last one of this week. And next week, we're rolling on with some really interesting stuff. Me back on Tuesday, as always, talking about, very exciting and impactful things, no doubt. Wednesday, we have a lady called Julie Screech joining us to do some really interesting, she's both a data scientist and a hypnotist, so that'll be fascinating. And Martin will, of course, be with us on Thursday. And it being Thursday, Martin is with us today. So just a quick intro, Martin.
Yes, so I'm Martin Lucas. I run Gap in the Matrix. So we help businesses grow performance, sales, marketing, service, advertising, all that kind of stuff that makes you money.
Good stuff. And I'm Phil. I am founding a business called Corporate Punk, which is all about making other businesses responsive, resilient, and innovative. So Recession Rebellion, as we always say, a different thing every day, 20, 25 minutes, a look at some topic that is going to help you think differently and act smartly so that you do not participate in the recession or indeed depression, which is already here, it seems, rather sadly. So, the heart of everything we're doing is the idea that as leaders, as people working in other businesses, we have choices. We can't choose the circumstances that we're in. We can't choose the fact we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and we can't choose the fact we're in the middle of an economic crisis, but we can choose how we respond. And so what we're doing with Recession Rebellion is just trying to give as much free food for thought as possible that will help people make better decisions, because as I was saying on Tuesday, there ain't that much help coming from anywhere else at the moment, so we have to do it for ourselves. So today, as always, it being a Thursday, the theme is innovation, and Martin Lucas, Mr. M. Lucas, will be taking us through a no doubt very stimulating session on decision making. If you've got questions as we go along, please type them into the box and I will pick up on those at the end. And we'll also drop a couple of other resources in there for you as well as this session goes on this morning. But Martin, who's talking about Decision Making 101, which is another way of saying, I suppose, how do you make good decisions when everybody else around you seems to be losing their head? Martin.
It's a great tee up. Thank you, Phil. So what I thought I would do today is something a little bit different, because I find that a lot of people, when they're talking about the mind and they're talking about thinking, they talk about just kind of functional type activity. And I think that that's useful. Functional stuff's good. But the thing that I've always been obsessed with is the structure. Because if you can understand the structure of something, the origin of how things work inside you, then you can make some practical decisions. Because my goal today is to give you a couple of aha moments about how you make decisions and how you can alter what I believe most of society perceives, which is it's just my DNA, it's just my personality. And that's a couple of the things that we're going to break today. So as I mentioned, I thought I'd do something a little bit different. I thought we would look at the human operating system, because the way that it operates inside the brain is that we've got millions of different habits, as we were talking about last week. We've got billions of neurons, and our neurons are literally our thoughts, and those thoughts get connected together by our glial cells. And quite an unknown thing, actually, but Einstein, so we've all heard of Einstein, so he's not unknown, but when they examined Einstein's brain, when he died, he had his brain put into, I'm always terrible with these names, formaldehyde, is that right, Phil? Am I saying it right? Sure?
Formaldehyde, you are saying correctly.
Right, good. That's a good start. So he had his brain put into formaldehyde, and when they examined it, which was over 40 years later, they found that he had a demonstrable larger amount, almost double the normal quota for glial cells. And what glial cells do is they protect neurons and they connect neurons together. So literally, Einstein could think 4 to 6 times quicker than any other human, right? So he had a rare human operating system. And what's interesting about this operating system is that the vast majority of everything that happens is unconscious, right? So we've got the most complex computer on this planet, and it's running 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time. And what it does is it just sends what it wants to the front of the brain, which, much like a phone, as you can see, is what you interact with, is what you think about, what we call the conscious mind. So the interesting thing about all of this is, well, if you can understand what sits behind it, then you can start to interrogate who you are and how your brain actually operates. And it's not even particularly complex, and that's what I'm going to be showing you next, is how does actually consciousness work relative to the 35,000 decisions that you're going to make every day. And the vast majority of those decisions, at least 98% of them in the work that I've done, are not conscious, meaning that you reject things, that's a decision. You know how to do 3 buttons up, that's 3 different decisions, right? It's all the functions about what you're doing in life. And here's how it works for you, because this concept that your personality is permanent and it's your DNA and everything like that is completely false. And the reason that I mentioned that today is I'm just going to give you a couple of insights so that you understand, particularly now, so as we're talking about the pandemic and things like that, right? What's going on and coming into our system is a lot of fear, a lot of panic, a lot of negative stuff, particularly via the media. And a lot of that is causing a lot of inertia that Phil was talking about on Tuesday and we were talking about last week. And that inertia, combined with the panic, combined with the fear, is unusual to our system. So the brain's going to try and adapt to it, and it's going to create decisions and experiences and ways to look at the world which are not necessarily going to serve you particularly well. Which is not to say that we're not all dealing with the same thing, that's difficult. But what I'm about to walk you through is a solution for how you can get past that and think differently and understand yourself a little bit better. So here's how it works within the brain, right? So everything you experience in life becomes knowledge, right? So you experience something, you learn it, that's your knowledge. Simple enough. That knowledge then becomes your behavior, meaning that you take it into your system, like what I was mentioning last week. Somebody teaches you how to tie your shoelaces, left over, right over, middle, left over, right over, middle. In today's world, we're getting told that we should panic, we should be in lockdown, we should fear this, we should fear that. There's a lot of death, there's a lot of trauma. All these types of things are putting a behavior into our system, mainly unconsciously, that's then generating, I would say, a lot of negative kind of decision making, which is either holding us back as individuals, holding back our happiness, or just holding back our career and how we're making decisions. Again, coming back to that inertia. And from that behavior, we create our habits. Left over, right over, middle, left over, right over, middle. You learn how to tie your shoelaces. It becomes a habit. If we're not conscious at the moment, if we don't control these experiences that are coming into us, we're generating negative habits for ourselves. And those habits can take hold right now. This can be some kind of deep systemic change, which is not helping you as a person, but this is us walking through how personality starts to change, because that behavior becomes your personality. That's how it works. So what you experience in life, how other people treat you, that knowledge that you take on, those habits, those behaviors, I'll keep repeating the same stuff every week, that thinking is a habit, speaking is a habit, listening is a habit, what you engage with is a habit. All of these things are part of your decision making. And your habit is personality. And from that, your personality then dictates the experience that you go out into the world with. So it creates this beautiful circle of life. I'm not going to try and sing it, but here's the point, is if you just look at this, this is a circle that shows how adaptive your brain is as an individual, right? So your personality gets altered as you go through life. Now, the vast majority of time, unless we go through a big life change, like we deal with a family member passing away, or we get married, or we have children, or we move to a different country, most of the time it's very marginal changes. And those marginal changes, like we're seeing in this circle, generally come into the system unconsciously, and they're leaving unconsciously as well. We don't catch them. We don't know that there's a big psychological condition going on inside us that is different depending on how we interpret panic, fear, whether we pause to actually take in what the media is saying or not. This is the human, right? So as I've mentioned, and I'll keep mentioning, is that we're born with a chemical and biological predisposition. So if you've got depression in the system, it's likely to be activated. If you're prone and you get given a certain type of disease, it's likely to be activated because it's coming from your family and things like that as well, right? Everything else is completely and utterly malleable. And I find that that's one of the most difficult things for people to accept, because it's one of the challenges about self-awareness and your decision making. And that's the fact that you're in complete control of it, but it's not necessarily that easy. But here's some tips to start you on a path to make it easy. So number one, decisions come from your operating system, right? It's your experience and your memory. And they're two slightly different things. So our memory triggers a lot of sensory type habits and emotions and feelings, Like at the moment, if you go out, if I go out into the garden and I can smell spring is coming, and there's a lot of sensory association with that. I put on an aftershave this morning, which reminds me of my favourite holidays that I've been on with my wife, because that's where we found the aftershave. So you've got memory stuff that triggers stuff, and then you've got experience. And your experience stuff is the things that are going on right now that are going to start altering your decision making. The question is whether you want to make it alter for the good or not. And that comes us on to step 2. So everything can be decoded and recoded. The reason why I mentioned at the start that the human operating system has got all this code behind the scenes is that computers are built in the same way that brains operate. It's no coincidence, right? So what we see is the screen on our phone, on our computer. We press buttons and it does stuff. When we press those buttons, behind the scenes, there's a million different things going on. And what we get is just a simple interface. And that's what consciousness is. It's a very simple interface, whereas the vast majority of work is going on behind the scenes, where your glial cells and your neurons going nuts trying to just keep all this running together, right? So it can be decoded and recoded, and that means that you can improve yourself and make some choices. And here's how to do it. All you have to do, particularly right now, is pause to think. That's it. So if you challenge yourself about, why am I feeling this way? Why am I about to take this action? Not about everything, not about the 35,000 decisions, but just enough, the things that matter. When you're considering what you're going to do with work, with your career, with your future, with your team, all of those things you want to pause and say, why am I actually doing it? Am I doing it because it's reactionary to everything that's going on in the world at the moment? Or am I doing it because it's the right decision? And when I talk about pausing to think, a lot of times people freak out and they're like, well, I don't have enough time to do it. This is a process that takes seconds. It takes seconds for you to do, because I'm challenging you to just start thinking about, when do I pause? What do I think about? Because if you do that, you can start hacking your operating system. And hacking your operating system, it sounds like it's a fancy terminology, really. All we're actually saying is that the decisions that you make are being influenced by what you experience in life at the moment. So if you challenge yourself to say, why am I making those decisions? What am I doing? And going back to one of the questions that I've raised before, a great question to ask is, does this serve me? Does this serve me? It's a great way to examine any question, because a lot of the times we humans are followers by nature. So we don't need to be surrounded by loads of people in a social context to follow what everybody else is doing. And if we follow what everybody else is doing, particularly at the moment, it's generally going to be on fear, panic, and inertia. And I don't believe that that's a good way to serve any individual, any business, or any leadership situation. So that's a 101 on decisions. Back to you, Phil, if we've got any questions.
So yes, just before we get into questions, which I'll talk to in a second, I've had a couple of questions through also this morning saying, how is it that you want us to promote recession rebellion, which of course we keep talking about, is how do we share and continue to get people here and continue hopefully to find new people who can benefit from what we're talking about. So it's a fair enough. We keep going share, and then at the same time we're not exactly clear on what it is we want to share. So I'm just dropping into the chat now a couple of suggestions for you. So the first thing is a link to an event page. So that link there has if you click on that link, it will create a recurring calendar invite, including the Zoom link for anybody that clicks on that. So share about Recession Rebellion. If you share that event link, it creates the page. It takes people to a page from which they can get an invite into their own diary, which puts it in there every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning at 9 a.m. So that's a good one. The second one is I've also shared a link to our YouTube channel, where we have all of these episodes on catch up afterwards. So quite a few people, we conflict with Joe Wicks at 9 o'clock in the morning, and quite a few people also have got children to juggle and everything else. So they prefer to catch up on what we're doing later on in the day, which is totally fine. There is a subscribe button against the Recession Rebellion channel on YouTube. So both of those links are now in the chat, and you can hopefully share those. The event page being, I think, the key one, because that actually does get stuff into people's diaries, which is really helpful to keep reminding them that we're doing what we're doing. So I have a question for you personally, Martin, before we get into those from the audience. I'm interested can you give me an example of from your own life and work recently where you've hacked your operating system in the way that you've described, and what impact did you get from doing that?
I'll tell you a really big one that came up yesterday, actually. So I've been working, and my team have been working incredibly hard on one of the UK banks, and we're doing it via an agency. And the MD of the agency called me yesterday, and he said that the agency's gone into liquidation, which is obviously not necessarily positive news. And what I've been working on this past month is just how to be calm under pressure. It's something that I believe I've always had, but I've been working on it even more because trying to focus on your business on growth and opportunity when the world is going a bit nuts around you has been quite challenging. So the first thing that came out of my mouth to the MD was, "Well, as I understand it, you don't own the business, right?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear about your job situation, but do you own the client relationships?" And he said, "Yeah, I've already had that conversation with them." I said, "Great. Let the dust settle, deal with your staff, and then let's have a conversation, because what we put together is a 7-figure opportunity." And he said, "That's exactly what I want to do." So there we go. So my panic, I just turned it into opportunity, really. So that's one example.
Yeah, I think at the moment, particularly, I mean, we've talked about this a lot in these sessions, haven't we? But panic being about the most counterproductive state I think that anybody can be in at the moment. It completely disempowers you and takes away kind of your energy from being able to make constructive, well-considered and effective decisions. Paul shares something with us. He says, "Good morning. To support Martin's point, one of our colleagues, Dr. Helen O'Neill, a top UCL geneticist, told us that your genome is the book of you and you can rewrite every chapter." So somebody from UCL very much agreeing with you there, Martin. So we've had another question. So Einstein wrote that we can't solve systemic problems with the same consciousness that created the problems in the first place. What tips do you have to help disrupt our current thinking to do things differently?
So one thing that relates to the previous question is that I've worked on one of the best pieces of advice I ever got given was by this coach. It's a lady, she's coach royalty, right? So she's like top tier kind of coach. And when I say she gave me advice, it wasn't one-to-one, right? I heard her talking about something. And she said that
You're royalty to me, Martin, yeah?
when you feel tension and when you feel pressure, that you should run with it. You don't fight tension. If you fight tension, then you're trying to avoid something that's going to happen no matter. And I felt it was just brilliant advice, because if you run with tension, you let it go, and it can be upsetting, it can be difficult, but you will let it go with it. And what I've done with tension is that I'm always looking for the origins of things. So when I feel tense, in the same way that if I feel panicked, if I feel frustrated about something, I always channel it into a positive, because I figure out where it's coming from, what the cause of it is, and then I take it on as a challenge for me personally that says, how can I fix it? How can I make it better? So that's one part of the answer to the question. I think on a practical level, the best tip that I've got is just being able to pause. I've got an active mind, right? It doesn't mean that it's always a positive thing. I've had to teach myself over a long period of time that the more that I pause and think about things, the more I'm putting myself into someone else's shoes, which means that I'm avoiding human selfishness. And human selfishness is not necessarily a bad thing, but in a business context, particularly in a sales and marketing and a brand strategy point of view, it's a massive issue for people, because what they're doing is putting too much of their own stuff into it. So I think being able to pause and just put yourself into somebody else's shoes in business context is massive, because it just breaks the wheel in terms of how you're currently thinking.
There's a healthcare business that we've worked with for a long time now, and they have a behaviour that they continually reinforce within their culture, which is pause, reflect, respond. Pause, reflect, respond. And it's a really great little phrase, actually, because it's just that really catchy kind of 3-word thing, and it's consistently reminding people in the company that the immediate reaction is not always the right reaction. So they just school that behavior in constantly about, pause, reflect, respond. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. Another one here has come in. So if one is stuck in a negative thought pattern developed over years, tell us a story of how you or someone hacked their way out.
So I'll do a really practical one that relates to work. I call it the Dr. Pepper rule. So somebody that I know incredibly well, ridiculously intelligent, and they were caught in a work situation where they weren't sharing their ideas, and they were getting really frustrated for it. And we were out for dinner catching up just one-to-one. And I said, well, why aren't you sharing your ideas? And they said, well, everybody in the rooms is more senior than me. And I said, well, what do you mean by senior? They said, well, age and job title. And I said, well, what's the worst that can happen? Which was just a direct take from the Dr. Pepper adverts at the time. This is a long time ago. And they got promoted within 6 months because they just went back into work and they started just sharing their ideas. And what I'd explained to them was, what is the worst that can happen? Even if they don't like your idea, they're still going to tag you with the fact that you had the idea, that you spoke up, that you were wanting to engage with them, and that you had those concepts. And I find that this is a really common unconscious thinking pattern, that we have this judgment that people in front of us are smarter than us, because it's a very common thing that I find the best entrepreneurs, the best salespeople, and I mentioned salespeople because I've trained 5,000 of them, right? So I'm just going with the data that I know. The best entrepreneurs and the best salespeople have got fraud syndrome inside them, right? So I think that self-belief challenges come across the piece. So when you're in a negative thinking pattern, for me, it's just about understanding why you're thinking the way that you are. And I guess the main thing that I want to put across for today, and what I'm always helping people with about self-awareness, is that your brain at the moment is likely to want to reject what I've been telling you today because of fear. And it will start telling you that, well, you're trying to tell me that there's something wrong with me and that I need to change who I am. And my key point is that it's not about saying that there's anything wrong with you. It's not about saying that you have to change, but what it is about is choice. Same as what I said last week, is what I'm giving you is techniques to actually understand. This is how you think. Does it actually serve me? This is how your personality comes to be, and thus your decision making. So you can just, on a practical level, just ask yourself, because a lot of our decisions are based on silly reasons from when we were children, or because somebody influenced us when we happened to be in a particular mood on one day. Most of it is just a little bit of neurotic change that we need to do. It's just awareness.
That really resonates with me. I think there's definitely something about, for me, in that, about if you can change the language as well, you can change the mindset. So in the first probably 10 years of my career, people who know me now will find this quite surprising, but probably in the first 10 years of my career, I was exactly where you were, Martin, or your friend was, sorry, which was very, very reluctant to speak up. And somebody talked to me years ago about, when they heard me do it, they talked to me about something called mitigating speech. And they define mitigating speech as, before you offer up an idea or an observation on anything, you will go, this may be a bad idea, but, or this may be a stupid thing to say, but, or yeah, I know I'm only the most junior person here, but. And the guy said to me, as soon as you use language like that, what you're actually doing is signaling to people, don't listen to anything that comes beyond that opening phrase.
Yeah.
And all you're actually doing unconsciously is reinforcing your low status relative to everybody else's, which is going to make it very, very hard for you to actually ever be anything other than low status in those conversations. Now, that was what I needed to hear, because as a sort of aggressive driven person, I was at the same time going, right, well, don't want to remain low status, so it sort of helped. But I think and for me, changing that language in terms of not using that sort of mitigating terminology, and you'll never hear me do it in meetings now, I will just simply sort of state, and unless we're in a brainstorm or a creative session, changing that language really helped me beat and hack through that particular mindset. So I think it's spot on what you're saying, Martin, there, actually. It really is. It's like, if we change, we live our lives in language. If we change what we do there, then actually we can also change the mindset and change the outcomes that we get. And I think that's absolutely critical, by the way, in the context of in the context of what we're talking about today, the recession rebellion stuff, because accessing the creativity of the people that work around you is so important at the moment. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago about the power of lateral thinking at this time. And so if what you've got is people who are unwilling or unable to connect their insights, their intelligence, their creative problem-solving capability into your organization because they're so concerned about things like their own status, then actually all you're doing is limiting your ability to fight back at a time when fighting back is going to be absolutely critical. So some of the stuff that Martin's just talked about there, I think, is so, so, so important, because we need to be encouraging the people that work around us as well to fully step into their own creative potential, fully step into their own roles. So that was just my thought on that. Further reading material, Martin?
On decision making?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. I wasn't expecting the question.
Uh,
I'm going to have to follow up with that on Tuesday's call. There we go. That's the reason for people to attend on Tuesday. I can't think of anything off the top of
No,
my head.
it's a fair point. I mean, there's, yeah, we'll follow up on Tuesday. I think it'd be an interesting thing to do in Recession Rebellion, actually, to start for us all to start sharing good things for us all to be reading as well. We'll pick up on that, Martin, because I think there's some, there's probably another way we can add a bit of value there. I want to say thank you for that. As always, brilliant to hear you talk, mate. It's really interesting what you have to say, and very helpful. I find it helpful to hear you. So I hope that others do as well. We are back on Tuesday, 9 o'clock, with me, and that is going to be probably, I'm prepping the session at the moment. It is going to be as even more probably straight talking than last Tuesday's session was, proper fire and brimstone stuff around what we continue to need to do to bring the fight back to the markets at which we serve over the coming weeks and months. So I'm really looking forward to talking with you then. In the meantime, please use that event link, get it out so we can get this help into the hands of people who need it. Get people subscribing to YouTube on Catch-Up. That's also really helpful. And all comments welcome. I wanted to thank everybody who's been so supportive of what we're doing this week. We've had emails, we've seen some great stuff on LinkedIn, there's been some tweets. I really, really appreciate it, Martin and I do. And as I say, it's only helping us get to more people and help them. So have a fantastic rest of your week. And we will look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday at 9 o'clock.
Thanks, folks.